The battlefield of Thebes was bathed in eerie twilight. The Lord of Shadows had emerged from the Duat, towering over the city like a living nightmare. His form shifted and swirled, an amorphous mass of darkness, his red eyes burning like twin suns in the black void. Isidora stood at the forefront of the army of light, the blade of Anubis in her hand. Her companions, the remaining sons and daughters of the sun, Nekht, Tefnut, Geb, and Khepri, formed a protective circle around her, their powers flaring in the dim light. But even as their divine energies crackled in the air, the oppressive weight of the Lord of Shadows pressed down on them. His presence was suffocating, and his whispered promises of doom echoed in their minds. "The light will fade," he hissed, his voice a storm of whispers. "Your gods have abandoned you." But Isidora stood firm, her eyes glowing with determination. "We are the chosen of the gods," she declared, her voice unwavering. "And as long as we stand, Egypt will never fall to the shadows." Pharaoh Nephru watched from the palace balcony as the battle began. The streets below were filled with chaos, soldiers clashing with shadowy figures, the sounds of war echoing through the city. But Nephru's heart was heavy with a truth he had not yet shared with his people. In his hands, he held the ancient scroll of Thoth, a sacred text passed down through the royal line for generations. It was said that the scroll held the key to defeating the Lord of Shadows, but at a great cost, the life of the pharaoh. Nephru had long known that his role in this war would not be to lead from the battlefield, but to make the ultimate sacrifice. To restore the balance between the mortal world and the Duat, a pharaoh must offer his soul to the gods. As he prepared himself for the ritual, he looked one last time at his beloved Thebes. He had ruled wisely and justly, and now it was time to give everything for his people. With a deep breath, Nephru began to chant the sacred words, his voice trembling with emotion. The air around him shimmered as the gods listened. The battle raged on in the streets below. Khepri, the warrior of fire, fought valiantly against the Shet-u, his flames burning brighter with each passing moment. But for every shadow he destroyed, more seemed to take its place. He knew the odds were against them, but he fought with the ferocity of a lion, his staff spinning in arcs of flame. Beside him, Isidora unleashed the fire of Sekhmet, her power surging in tandem with his. But the Lord of Shadows had not forgotten about Khepri. In a sudden burst of dark energy, the demon lord struck at the warrior of fire, sending him crashing to the ground. Khepri struggled to rise, his flames flickering weakly. Isidora rushed to his side, her heart pounding in her chest. "Khepri," she cried, kneeling beside him. Khepri smiled weakly, his once vibrant eyes dimming. "It's all right," he whispered. "My flame was never meant to burn forever. You must carry it now." With a final breath, Khepri's body dissolved into ash, and the fire of Sekhmet within Isidora flared brighter than ever before. The Lord of Shadows descended upon the battlefield, his form growing larger and darker as he absorbed the energy of his fallen minions. He towered over Isidora and her companions, his shadowy tendrils reaching out to envelop them. Nekht, the warrior of water, sent a torrent of waves crashing toward the demon lord, but the water dissipated into the darkness. Tefnut's winds howled as they attempted to drive the shadows back, but they were swallowed by the void. Geb's earth-shattering blows seemed to barely scratch the surface of the darkness. The Lord of Shadows laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that sent chills down their spines. "You are nothing compared to the power of the Duat," he taunted. "This world is mine." Isidora's hands trembled as she gripped the blade of Anubis. She could feel the weight of the gods' expectations on her shoulders, but doubt gnawed at her heart. How could they possibly defeat such a force? But then a voice whispered in her mind, Khepri's voice. "Do not fear the darkness, for the light within you will always burn brighter." With renewed determination, Isidora raised the blade high. "We are not nothing," she declared, her voice ringing out across the battlefield. "We are the chosen of the gods, and we will fight until our last breath." As the battle raged, Pharaoh Nephru completed the sacred chant. The scroll of Thoth began to glow with a golden light, and the air around him hummed with divine energy. He could feel the gods watching, their presence overwhelming yet comforting. But Nephru knew that the power of the scroll would only delay the Lord of Shadows, not destroy him. To truly end the war, the barrier between the mortal world and the Duat had to be sealed forever. And for that, a sacrifice was needed, his sacrifice. With trembling hands, Nephru held the scroll to his heart and whispered a final prayer. "May my soul find peace in the afterlife, and may my people live in the light." As he spoke the final words, his body began to fade, his essence dissolving into pure energy. The gods had accepted his sacrifice, and the ritual to restore the barrier had begun. On the battlefield, Isidora could feel the shift in the air. The Lord of Shadows recoiled as the power of the gods surged through the land. But he was far from defeated. "You think this will stop me?" The demon lord roared, his shadowy form twisting in fury. "I will tear this world apart." Isidora knew that this was their only chance. With a cry of defiance, she charged toward the Lord of Shadows, the blade of Anubis glowing with divine light. Nekht, Tefnut, and Geb followed, their powers combining into a brilliant display of elemental fury. The clash between light and darkness was cataclysmic. The ground shook, the sky burned with divine energy, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble. But Isidora and her companions fought with everything they had, refusing to give in to the overwhelming darkness. As the Lord of Shadows raised his massive hand to strike her down, Isidora leaped forward, the blade of Anubis slashing through the air. With a scream of fury, the blade connected with the demon lord, cutting through the shadows like a knife through mist. For a moment there was silence. The Lord of Shadows stood frozen, his form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. Then, with a final guttural roar, his body began to disintegrate, the shadows dissolving into nothingness. Isidora watched in disbelief as the great demon lord crumbled before her. The war, it seemed, was finally over. But even as the darkness faded, Isidora felt a deep sorrow wash over her. Khepri was gone. Pharaoh Neferu had given his life for the cause. The cost of victory had been great. With the Lord of Shadows defeated and the Shet-u banished back to the Duat, Egypt was saved. But Isidora knew that the battle had not truly ended. The barrier between the worlds was fragile, and it would require constant vigilance to keep it intact. Isidora stood before the temple of Ammonius-Ra, her heart heavy with the weight of her new responsibility. She was now the keeper of the vigil, tasked with ensuring that the barrier between the worlds remained strong. Nekht, Tefnut, and Geb stood beside her, their powers still glowing faintly in the aftermath of the battle. Together, they would watch over Egypt, ready to defend it from any future threats. As the sun rose over Thebes, casting its golden light across the land, Isidora made a silent vow. She would never forget those who had sacrificed everything for this victory, and she would never allow the shadows to rise again. In the aftermath of the battle, the people of Egypt mourned their fallen pharaoh. Neferu was remembered as a wise and just ruler, one who had given everything for the safety of his kingdom. But his legacy lived on. The ritual he had completed ensured that the barrier between the mortal world and the Duat would remain strong for generations to come. His name would be honored in temples and sung in songs for centuries. Isidora stood before Neferu's tomb, her heart filled with both sorrow and gratitude. "Your sacrifice saved us all," she whispered, "and I will make sure it was not in vain." As the first rays of sunlight touched the land, Isidora and her companions stood atop the temple of Ammonius-Ra, gazing out over the city of Thebes. The people below were beginning to rebuild, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that the Shet-u had been defeated. But Isidora knew that the fight was not over. The shadows would always linger at the edges of the world, waiting for their chance to return. And so, she and her companions would remain vigilant, standing as the last line of defense between the mortal world and the darkness. With the blade of Anubis in hand and the power of the gods at her side, Isidora was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. For as long as the sun rose over Egypt, the light would never fade.